Hello, hello. I just wanted to spend some time nerding out about the nervous system. One, because as a body worker and a mover, as when I shattered my own arm, I learned about the nerves. I didn't really know what they were before in my life. And, our basic understanding of nerves is that they create motor function. So what I learned as a body worker, when people come to you stressed or in pain, that eventually I learned how to talk to the nervous system, that working with the fascia, working with the tissue, working with the fascia is also, in a sense, working with the nervous system, because the fascia has its own kind of matrix of the nervous system and its own intelligence, as does muscle tissue, but muscle tissue may have less than fascia. Fascia definitely has more organ, has more nerve tissue. Skin has more nerve tissue, mouth, face, eyes, and it shapes how we interact, how we handle, injury and healing. So what I wanted to do was just give you a very basic, this is very basic, and it's visual. I'll give you some words, but visual of nervous system 101, just structure. And this is something that I also learned taking anatomy, teaching anatomy, and also doing dissections. And the more I learned, again, the easier it was for me to connect to somebody's nerves, the actual structure of the nerves, when their body wouldn't respond to much else. And I think that we have that capacity to do within ourselves through movement. And that's one thing that I've also found, that it doesn't always have to be touch, even though touch is amazing, because we are electromagnetic, and my touching somebody else's nervous system influences their nervous system. But we can also do that for ourselves. And again, not just the kind of sensory motor, but the other aspects of the nervous system that relate to our emotion, our very kind of primal animal response. All right, so I'm just going to start, because I will just keep talking. And I want this to be a little on the shorter side, so we can do more of these. I did one of these lessons and I think it was over an hour, so we're gonna try not to do that. Shoot for short. Okay, so nervous system, and again, this is very kind of structure and a little bit of function. But the central nervous system, which is our brain, and you'll see these in a minute, the cerebrum, the cerebellum, which is, cerebrum is more in the front, cerebellum more in the back, the limbic system, which is more center of the brain, connected to emotion and memory, and the brain stem, which is more primal or basic body functions. We can think of kind of lizard brain, mammalian brain, human brain, and then our spinal cord. So brain and spinal cord is our central nervous system, encaged in our skull and vertebral column. The peripheral nervous system is where the nerves come out of the spinal column into our tissues. Sensory and motor, or sensory meaning that there's the input from the system, right? Proprioception, interoception, mechanoreception, different perceptions, whether conscious or not. Parasympathetic and sympathetic system, which we will talk about, in the enteric nervous system. So parasympathetic and sympathetic are autonomic nervous system aspects. They are automatic responses of the body. Enteric nervous system is the lining of our GI tract. All right, this lining, you can see it in your mouth. that goes from the mouth to the anus is embedded with its own nervous system and has as much nerve tissue as our spinal cord, which is amazing. Here's another kind of just visual: central nervous system, peripheral nervous system. This is moving out from center to the rest of the body. And you have two aspects: motor, right, moving out towards the rest of the body, and sensory, moving, oops, where'd it go? I just jumped a bunch of, hold on. My apologies. I must have hit something and it jumped around. And we're going all the way back. Okay, sensory towards, and we used to think it was just to the brain, but parts of the body can act without needing to send information to the brain and wait for a response, that there is intelligence in the body to manage itself, right? And that the part of the motor is our somatic nervous system, which is motor function, voluntary, and then involuntary, autonomic nervous system, which is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Right, sympathetic, more mobilizing of body systems, predominantly organ systems, and the parasympathetic, conserving energy. And so we know them as fight or flight and rest, housekeeping. Okay, I'm just going to skip through a little bit. So this is just skull and brain inside. Again, these are all renditions. They're all not perfect, but they're basic to help us understand. Right, so this is an inner shot of the meninges, basically, which are the layers, the outer layers of the brain. And we have the pia, which is the outermost layer of the brain. The subarachnoid space is where the cerebrospinal fluid moves through. And then you have the meninges, which are above the subarachnoid space. This is fluid, and then you have these two outer layers. And the outer layer connects to the skull. So you have these three layers, the meninges that wrap around the brain and the spinal cord, to protect, right, that fluid is a buffer as well, nourishment, as well as probably moving fluids, right? We have, the brain has its own kind of arteries, veins, and nerves. So even nerves have nerves. Good, and just brain, right? We have the cerebrum, the big aspect of the brain, the cerebellum in the back. This is the brain stem. You might have heard midbrain, pons, medulla, which connect to the spinal cord. And the brainstem is important just because we have nerves coming off of that, cranial nerves. And this is our limbic system, which is brain tissue and glands, right? Thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary, pineal, our endocrine system. So our nervous system and our endocrine system are very tied together. This is just a highlight of the limbic system. Like, this is more memory, emotion, very complex, not so easy to describe in a sentence. But this is just a view, right? The corpus callosum is the tissue that connects the right side and the left side. It's a kind of information highway connecting right and left. Cerebellum, again, is more, I'd say mammalian in movement and motor control, and brainstem might be more even basic, although not necessarily. So this is just an overview. Again, it's just a schematic. The nervous system is much, much more intricate than that, but you have the brain, the spinal cord, the spinal nerves, which moves out into more muscle tissue. This is what this schematic is. This is an actual corpse, brain, cranial nerves. You see these little branches off of the hindbrain, midbrain, and these are nerves that come out of our vertebral column. This is again, these are both real or they've been treated, but this is again a brain, spinal cord, and these are the major nerves. If you look at this image, they've kind of infused the cardiovascular system with a plastic and then had the rest of the body kind of removed from the plastic. So this is really just the fullness of the cardiovascular system, but the cardiovascular system and the nervous system move together. So we think of just how sensitive the skin is when we prick, just even a prick, right? That the capillary beds are so close to the surface, but infused in all tissues. So every aspect of our tissue has an artery, a vein, and a nerve. And some cells have that too. Bone cells have that too. And this is, again, just an image of the nerves that not going out for motor control, for muscle control, but towards the organs, right? They wrap around the front of the spinal column and form these ganglion, these little nubs and plexuses, and innervate organs. Spinal nerves, again, these are the basic cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, moving to different areas, coccygeal nerve, right? So on the left side, we have, again, the spinal nerves moving more towards tissues. Here's our big sciatic nerve, our famous sciatic nerve. This is our famous brachial plexus coming from the neck, innervating the arm. And this is our, right, what's specific about this is the ganglion that move around towards the front of the spinal cord and spinal column and forms this ganglion chain, which then is part of our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. I think the ganglion is mostly sympathetic, and these parasympathetic or sacral and upper cranium. And this is just again, just to feel into how much tissue is innervated or how much nerve tissue there is. And here's another kind of spinal cord, spinal nerves. Right, there's our famous sciatic nerve. Okay, these are the cranial nerves. There's 12 of them, and they innervate head, face, ears, eyes. The green line is sensory fibers, and the purple line is motor fibers, right? So some of these organs have both. It's interesting, the eye has motor, but not showing, not sensory here. And then here, our cranial nerve 10 is our most famous nerve, which has motor and sensory, and the vagus nerve. Right? And this is again, a schematic of the vagus nerve, comes from the brain stem and innervates quite a bit of internal organs. Okay, cervical nerves from the cervical spine. One of the most prominent is the phrenic nerve. I know it's hard to tell from this picture. This is a rib cage. These are ribs. This is your heart. This is the pericardium, the container around the, very similar to the meninges around the brain, the pericardium around the heart, and the diaphragm. So the phrenic nerve innervates the diaphragm. But just again, just seeing the tissue, the movement of artery, vein, nerve, so blue, red, yellow, and that pattern happens throughout the whole body. You see there's this, the red, the blue, the yellow, they move together through the body. Okay, brachial plexus, these are lower cervicals, and the innervation for the arm. This is our collarbone. These nerves move under the clavicle out into the kind of armpit, arm into the hand. And there's our sense of the bones. Again, you see just how, right, there's a little sense of more tissue, less nerve tissue, but there's so many branches upon branches of nerve tissue. Okay, the lumbar, right, coming out of the lumbar spine and moving down through the bowl of the pelvis, down the front of the leg, innervating mostly muscle tissue inside the pelvis, front of leg. There's a little bit, you can see the interaction of the psoas and the iliacus with the nerve tissue, just the amount of nerve coming out of the lumbar spine. And then this is, again, our sciatic nerve coming out of the sacrum, down the back of the leg. Okay, and then we have our thoracic nerves, which mostly do breathing. All of our thorax muscles and rib cage. Okay, so again, basic nerve, right? Nucleus, the body of the nerve, the dendrites, where they communicate, the axon, dendrite, the synapse is the space between the dendrites, the communication one cell to the next cell, right? The signal direction. This is what they're saying, presynaptic, postsynaptic. This cell is talking to this cell. Okay. And that was just proprioception, right? There are specific nerve tissues that in the joints, in the tendons that help us know where we are in space, where our body is in space. Nocioception is more of the internal environment and typically focused on what's not right. And these are just images. I love this because we have the cerebellum, the cerebrum, and the spinal cord neurons. Here's another brain. Mechanoreceptors in the skin, in the tissues that let us know pressure, touch, heat, cold, pain. All of our skin, joints. And then this is an interesting, just a nerve. This is a single nerve that is made up of smaller strands. It's very similar to a muscle fiber, and that you have fibers wrapped, single fibers wrapped, and then you have a strand of fibers that then create a group, and that's wrapped, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you have a muscle, right? And this is all of the wrapping is the fascia, which is fascinating. So you get to see how complex our fascial matrix is, as well as how much nerve tissue, and you can even see the nerve has artery and vein. Okay, and this is just a cross-section of the spinal cord, the front and the back, We have our front ventral root, spinal nerve, and our dorsal root, and there's our ganglion that creates the sympathetic nerve chain and the dorsal rami. But you have sensory and motor in both front and back, right, to the skeletal nerves and to the autonomic nervous system. And there's just another spinal cord within these are the vertebral bodies. There's your intervertebral discs, the vertebral or the spinal nerves coming out. This is our ganglion and the forming of our sympathetic ganglion chain. Again, this is a schematic of sympathetic nervous system, right? Brain. It's a very big brain. And brain stem, spinal cord, and you see how, right, you have the thoracic nerves that come out and create this sympathetic nerve chain, innervating organs from eyes to uterus, penis, all the organs. And you have your parasympathetic, which again comes more from the brain stem and the sacral nerves, which is interesting, also innervates those same tissues, but coming from different places in the body, right? This is why craniosacral work is so fascinating. I'm not going to go over that yet. And then this is the enteric nervous system. Again, a schematic. It might actually, no, I'm not sure if it's, I think it might just be a schematic, but it's just a sense of the nerve tissue embedded in the lining within the lining of your GI tract, right? From your mouth to your anus. So your mouth, esophagus, down to stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, right? That it's all highly innervated. And right, the communication between all of, right, the enteric nervous system, which is also interesting in that how it relates to food, and not just how we respond to food, but how we crave food. It also relates to our microbiome. And then our enteric nervous system, right? If you remember the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic and sympathetic also innervate. So there is multiple forms of communication, and the communication system is so fast and so complex that we have all the nerves communicating with each other. We have the nerves communicating with the organs, with the glands communicating, right? The endocrine system communicating. It's just way more intricate than we can possibly understand. It's quite magnificent, actually. And interesting, because sometimes we can look at, is our digestion related to what we eat or what we're ingesting in our body, just in our environment, how it's impacting us emotionally? And is that also impacting our pain levels, even through nervous system? Maybe it's through the endocrine system, right? This incredibly complex communication system, right? And that's just a brief, the endocrine system, right? The organs and how they just support, right? If we think about fight or flight, that the body automatically releases cortisol or adrenaline, that they move together, that they're not separate, right? All of these systems move together. They're not separate systems. We are a unified whole body, physical, emotional, mental, personality, spirit, complex being. So I hope that's helpful. That's a little longer than I wanted it to be, but if you have any questions, please let me know. And look forward to seeing you again.